Hello everyone and welcome to Hinterland Studio's The Long Dark, a first-person survival exploration game. Set in the frigid Canadian wilderness after a global geomagnetic disaster, the player takes on the role of a crash-landed pilot. When starting a new game, the player is placed in a random location and must do whatever possible to survive, be it finding food, shelter, clothing, or keeping safe from the vicious, desperate wildlife. My name is Adam Cockman, and thanks for joining me today. Jumping straight into things, I'm here to take a look at the user experience of the game, discussing some of the great features designed by the Hinterland team, as well as some of the issues I've found in my experiences. A pros and cons list, plain and simple. Starting with the pros, the first one I want to mention is the design for Immersion and Realism. Honestly, the Long Dark's ability to draw its users into the environment and game world is phenomenal. It does this in more ways than one. The most important probably being its user interface design, also known as the UI. Their UI takes minimalism to the extreme, and oftentimes the player will find themselves looking at nothing on their screen but the game environment. Almost nothing crowds the screen that could possibly hinder the view of the beautifully designed world, drawing the player into it as much as possible through visuals alone. Adding to the realism, there's no in-game map to the Long Dark. Instead, players need to pull charcoal from their own burnt-out fires and use that to survey their surroundings and create one. Plus, because of the disaster, there's no compass or waypoint marker to show where they are, so players need to determine their location from these maps based off landmarks and recall. For more immersed engagement, mechanically, the game allows for realistic multitasking when it comes to tending to fires. Specifically, cooking their food and boiling their water. Once the food is placed on or near the heat, the player is allowed to move around and tend to other concerns as the cooking time elapses. This creates a more cognitively active approach to the task, and forces them to remember to check back later, rather than just waiting around for the process to complete itself. The second pro I want to talk about is feedback, another great UX feature of the Long Dark that comes across as deceptively subtle. Of the many feedback features, the simplest yet most effective is probably the use of the reticle. It's slight, and yet also incredibly informative, as it seamlessly fades in and out of the UI as the player hovers the center of their screen over anything interactive, never staying for too long. Plus, there's always translucent descriptors of the objects that appear below the reticle, so the player knows exactly what they're looking at. And on top of this, the reticle can change shape and meaning depending on the type of interaction the object holds. Items with instant interactions display a small, square, selective reticle. A simple click and the action is performed. Otherwise, items requiring searching or time to interact with will show a circular progress bar, where clicking and holding is necessary to complete the action. In other words, the reticle alone is able to convey most everything a player needs to know about an item before they even interact with it. Another feedback feature is how the game gives status alerts. Rather than UI pop-ups or information blocks, which can be helpful in some cases, the character that the player is controlling will instead audibly comment on happenings within the game.
Can't feel my feet.
This method of feedback, in this particular instance, is what we call diegetic. It gives information to the player in a form that fits within the context of the game. While a pop-up text alert about your temperature could accomplish the same thing, having the character mention it aloud is less obtrusive, it doesn't threaten the minimal UI design goals, and thinking aloud is totally believable for the character's lonely situation. Moving on, and quickly wrapping up this pros list, the last feature I want to point out is the easily navigable game menus. The first one I want to point at is the in-game inventory system. It's coherently structured and intuitively organized. Large umbrella sections are found at the top, and cycling through them brings up the smaller subsections within. Each one has a different layout that may be overwhelming at first, but with a closer look, they're organized to show what the player needs to see and when they need to see it. So that's all well and good, but by far the most important feature is also one of the most user-friendly ones, the radio menu. This is a quick inventory access menu that appears as a translucent circle in the center of the screen when the player holds down the spacebar. With this, the user is able to access their important, commonly used items without having to open the large inventory screen. Food, drink, campcraft, medicine, and even other personally added items, since it's customizable and personable. Using the radio menu means the player gets use of their stuff without having to stick their head in their backpack, always able to keep one eye observing the environment. Now, moving past the pros, I want to discuss some of the cons I found in The Long Dark, and for the sake of this video, these will be defined as user experience features that take away from a positive play experience. As a quick heads up, I'll be breaking the cons into 3 different parts each. The first being simply identifying the issue. Second, I want to recognize why this design aspect might exist in the first place. Obviously, I'm not a part of the Hinterland team, so really it's just going to be some theorizing as to why these features might have been included or overlooked. And third, I'll give suggestions for what could be done to fix these issues. This not only offers some ideas to think about, but also to get everyone's designer brains churning and thinking together. Right, moving on with it. The first thing I want to talk about is the in-game tools. Some of the essential and crucial items the player can find in-game include hatchets, hacksaws, sewing kits, and even can openers. And while these items definitely increase survival rate, they kind of border on being a necessity. Specifically, not being able to find any during the early stages of the game can make or break a player's survival rate, since they help keep a player's gear functional, they keep the equipment usable, and they keep food nourishing. Now, I understand that there's procedural generation in place for a reason. Finding and not finding one of these items offers different play experiences for every time a new game is started, and variety is a great thing to have in a survival game. But struggle, due to circumstances outside of a player's control, can feel punishing and demeaning. Here's a few things that could be done differently, but still keep to the aspect of differing play experiences. Instead of having these items randomly spawn, have the player start out with 1 or 2 of the tools, maybe even let them choose which ones. Or, instead of that, increase the spawn chances for these tools until at least 1 is picked up, then you can lower the spawn rates back down to normal. Alright, the next issue I want to talk about is the system in place for time-consuming actions, like breaking down objects or repairing items. Actually, it's quite a good system overall. How the game shows the player the length of time an action will take to complete before they start is quite nice. Plus, having that time quickly elapse after confirming the action is a great way to keep the player engaged and active in the core gameplay without forcing them to sit through the menial process of it all. But sometimes that quick process can end up being a player's downfall. Here's a quick example. In one of my survival files, I was doing the best I had ever done. Easily one of the longest running survival files I've had. I was stocked full of resources and medicine and was ready for the next area, so I ventured off. Of course, the first thing I run into is a wolf, which very quickly chased me down and bit into my hand. But I fought it off and was now suffering from blood loss. I take out my old man's beard lichen bandaging, wrap it up, and take a nice nap in a car to refresh my now dangerously low fatigue. But I didn't realize that I hadn't successfully bandaged myself, and my blood loss was still in effect. The moment I clicked confirm on the sleep action, I saw my health bar drain from full to empty in less than 2 seconds. Game over. Now, obviously this is largely my fault for not realizing the bandaging didn't work fully. I mean, there's UI elements and feedback methods in place to tell me. And while learning through failure is a large part of the survival genre, in this instance, something between the game and the player didn't fully click, and a small lack of comprehension was met with the heaviest punishment possible. And this can happen in lesser extents in other areas as well, like breaking down a large object out in the cold and sudden risks of hypothermia crop up. Afflictions can arise when they seem so far away, and massive chunks of health can be lost really quickly. The time given to comprehend what's happening and respond is very short, and the punishment for not doing so is heavy. Again, this quick passage of time is honestly very nice when safety isn't an issue, and these instances are, in hindsight, avoidable just through sheer practice, knowledge, and generally just paying closer attention. But the mechanic is still a large culprit in the end. So, here's some things that could be implemented to alleviate these heavy punishments. To avoid it altogether, Give the players a warning before they confirm the action, something to tell them that by clicking confirm, they will lose health in the time it takes to complete it. Even stick to the diegetic feedback methods and have the character say something like, "This might not be a good idea," or "It's too cold for this." This is like the "are you sure?" question you see when quitting a game or saving over an old file, a failsafe to protect players from themselves. Or, if we want to stick to the learn by failure method, a really nice quality of life addition could be to simply allow the players to see their 4 stats on the same UI as the action. They'd be shown where they're currently at in terms of health and time, but would still have to decide themselves whether or not to confirm it. This gives the players a bit more information about their current status, and lets them make an informed decision so long as they're paying attention. The third issue I want to talk about, and I know this is already a debated topic among the Long Dark's player base, and that's the inability to jump. Whether it's liked or not, I think it's still something worth noting. The main thing is that it feels very mechanically restrictive to a player within a mechanically complex environment. However, I do understand that the gear weighs upwards of 30 kilograms, or 70 pounds. Plus, all of the snow definitely doesn't make it easier. Even in a real environment, this is totally understandable. However, being stuck on one side of a fence, log, or rock because the player can't simply climb or step over it feels like it's reverting back to old restrictive game design. Maybe, instead of a full-fledged jump button, it could be something along the lines of a climb over button. Shorter obstacles like small fences, tipped trees and logs, or just big rocks are a pain if the player has to walk all the way around it, especially if they're pressured for time and resources. Instead, simply climbing over them would be far less frustrating and still realistic. Or, second suggestion, maybe add a jump, but just make the jump small and pathetic, just to drive the point home that it's legitimately very difficult to jump in their condition. If needed, tax the fatigue stat for everything you climb over or jump. Then the player would have to gauge if going around or climbing over would be more taxing in the end. Alright, the last issue I want to mention is a simple and uncommon wildlife behavior feature that almost seems like a bug. Other than the weather itself, the most common threat found in the Long Dark are the wolves. An encounter with an aggressive wolf means being threatened with an immediate game over unless 1, you have the right tools to fend it off, or 2, you simply enter a building. All's fine and good. Obviously wolves can't open doors, so the player has nothing to fend off with. They just have to wait out their patience inside the warmth and safety of 4 walls and a rooftop. But there's one specific instance that kind of threw me for a loop, and that's with these small ice fishing huts on the frozen waters of the bay in the coastal highway region. And without spoiling anything, let me just show you. About 3 square meters of space, no door, and barely having 4 walls, running inside of one of these bad boys looks like the equivalent of jumping inside a tank to the logic of this wolf AI. I get that these small huts could be considered safe zone buildings, since they have all the necessities, a fireplace, some drawers, loot, and maybe the game logic only allows the devs to place these items in buildings. But not having the wolf trounce right into the open door and drag me out by my feet was definitely a surprise. Even more so was when it ran away whimpering in complete fear like this hut was a weapon. Maybe a bug, maybe innate game logic, I'm not sure. But something here could be done to help it all make a bit more sense. The obvious fix could be to lose the safe ground these huts provide. The other fix could be to add a door. But if making the hut into an instance building isn't ideal, even adding a simple door that opens and closes similar to the visors inside of cars would be a nice addition. All in all, the Long Dark offers some excellently thought out user experience design. I tend to focus more on the cons than the pros, since I think there's more value in highlighting what's wrong than the bits they got right. Nevertheless, Hinterland Studio have been very detailed and clearly put in a lot of effort to make sure their game matches their vision and their audience gets the most enjoyable player experience. Personally, the pros heavily outweigh the cons, but if any of them stood out to you as over or underdeveloped, let me know in the comments section. In any case, that's all I have for now, so I'll be turning in for the day. This has been Adam Kaufman. Thanks for watching.